my goal? Is this thing the right tool to solve? And so you talk about the creativity side of things, like I'm trying to solve a problem. Is this the right tool to help solve my problem? We kind of talked about this whole idea of generalization, and this model can do everything. But typically when you're engaging with a model like this, you have some sort of outcome you're looking to achieve. And it doesn't need the world's, it doesn't need to be a super intelligence to help you do that, right? Generalization versus specialization. Like, how do you guys sort of think about that in terms of when you're engaging with these models and helping people understand, when you guys are teaching classes and telling people and trying to explain? Because I'm sure it is like you just see a text box and it's just like the first time, hello, hi, and you don't know that it's a dialogue and that you're actually trying to drive it with intent. And so how do you help people understand that it's like,
we one of the places that we like to go back and start at the absolute beginning just quickly for people, which is that humans think in 1, 2, 3, 4, oh my God, I'm losing my train of thought. We think very low dimensionally. So why do we even need AI in the first place? Because machines can think in essentially, limitless.
And dimensions.
Yeah. And for that is a very basic starting point for people to conceptualize that one, for a lot of people to even just understand that there is such a thing as a high dimensional space. That as soon as you move out of 3 dimensions, that our ability to conceptualize just sort of evaporates, it goes away. It can be there with a lot of training, but it's not a natural place for us to be. And then that gives you that first, I guess, handhold in the canyon, right? Where it's like, okay, now I understand what a machine can do that's different from what I can do. The next handhold is linking all of those things together. And then the next handhold is walking and journeying through that. And being able to give just some very early steps through that data, through that, like, okay, so you're trying to solve a problem in a domain that you understand really well. Okay, that's really different than understanding something in a domain that you have really very little understanding of. So even just getting people to sort of separate in their minds that the way that you would query a person, a peer in an area that you understand really well is actually really different than being in an area where querying someone in an area that you don't understand well at all. So giving people like this mental model of it's maybe you got a really smart intern that you can ask to go and as a research assistant to go and do some research for you. What kind of questions would you give that person to go and find out for you? What are those problems? So you sort of got to start with a little bit of anthropomorphizing and help people through that process of, and then they go through this gate of, this isn't a person. This is a completely alien scale of intelligence. And then when you get to that point, you've broken the back of that sort of resistance. After that, trust comes in. It's like that old, I think it's an old military saying, trust is gained in teaspoonfuls and lost in buckets. No, it's back to you build trust with good stepwise interactions where your confidence is well calibrated, where you're not over trusting or under trusting the machine. You learn what the right level of trust is.
So that's interesting, as I think you and I had talked about this last night, is that we trust people in a different way than we trust machines. People, there's an emotional aspect to that. I trust you because I know you. We don't know machines. The way we trust machines is that they do something consistently over time. And we see that and we trust it to do it again. When I do talks on AI, one of the things I start with is I ask who implicitly trusts AI. Raise your hand, and no one raises their hand. And I say, raise your hand if you use Siri, raise your hand if you use Maps, raise your hand if you use Alexa, and everyone raises their hand. So everyone uses AI every day, whether you know it or not, as you were saying this morning, but nobody trusts it. I love what you just said, the analogy of kind of spoonfuls. So like these small interactions help us gain trust with AI. I'm curious in your practice. So, because what you're doing is so important. I think this is not a dystopian, utopian thing. We're on an evolution right now. There's an inevitability to what's happening. And so we have to understand how to trust AI. What do you do in your practice to help companies kind of go to take that journey? Are there things you're advising them to do or to kind of get their teaspoons?
Yeah, it comes through usage. I mean, really, because we trust based on experience.
Mhm.
And you're right that we do trust. We have different sort of qualifications for trust of humans and machines. And we like to say that we trust because we judge humans based on their intent.
Yeah.
So I trust that you intend to do a good job. Whether the outcome is a good job or not is less important to me than whether I trust that what your intent is going into this. But we measure a machine based on the outcome. There's never been a concept of like, well, what did the machine intend to do? What do we mean? The machines don't intend to do a thing, right? But now we're in this weird mode where we're like, well, what is it trying to do? And in reality,
it is moving around.
It is moving around. And in reality, we sort of slid into this world a little bit because, how many people stop and really think about what the intent is behind the YouTube algorithm in terms of what gets served to you, right? It's a very sophisticated, but quite simplistic in terms of its outcome, which is just to keep you watching, right? That's all it's there to do, right? Is to keep you watching the next video. And so there is, in some ways, an intent it was programmed with. There's something different now, though, in that when you can see just a couple of steps down the road, my guess is if we sat down in another year, the agent actions will feel much more like there's intent, like it actually was given the ability to have some level of intent.
Well, we'll put intent into it.
Yeah.
Whether there's intent there or not, I think we'll start to see more intent. The fascinating thing about generative AI is that and one of the things that makes it so different from traditional AI is that it's a true cultural technology.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to sit in the cultures in which we place it.
Mm-hmm.
And that trust becomes a much more complicated sort of Rubik's Cube.
Mm-hmm.
And when you say, well, why don't people trust AI now? I think there's a lot of different answers. There are some really bad examples of poorly designed and poorly implemented AI. And a lot of the worst examples have happened in social situations, whether it's allocating housing, allocating credit, access to education. These things they really matter to people. They are path-dependent decisions that make a massive difference in people's lives. And some have been incredibly badly done. That the transfer of there's one famous example where a disability payment system was trained on data from a state in the South, can't remember which one, and then transferred into Oregon. And that is not a valid transfer. The entire data system, as well as just how disability payments were made in the state, completely different. A whole lot of people, a lot of harm caused, harm happens before people even notice. So because that way of thinking of rationing, of using predictive AI to make decisions automatically and then carve cohorts in the data without any human accountability, you can't pick up a phone and ask someone why they did that. The appeals of that, the appeal to a different outcome is almost impossible. And so what we have there is like so many examples of good reasons not to trust algorithmic systems, especially since a lot of them applied to the so-called high cost to serve. And the high cost to serve happen to be the most disadvantaged in society a lot. So we've got that layer. Then we've got this layer of sort of what I like to think of as kind of the Hollywood-esque mindset, where it's not like Hollywood's trained us to trust AI. So we've got that sort of cultural
right?
umbrella. And then we've got what we'd call like sort of shitty automation, like just really bad automation. Too much automation being placed in too many AI tools directed at one individual user. So, for example, in retail, there might be a high-paced real-time retail environment where multiple systems are directed at one individual trying to do something in a physical environment. And the siloed linear nature of the company, they've all designed their own app or their own system to be optimized for that particular use case, but they don't actually look at the user's experience on the whole. So what would have been a really good automation helpful tool, decision-making tool, because there's 5 of them, multiple of directed to one individual who's already suffering cognitive overload from all the things that can't be digitized, it kind of collapses the system. So you end up with like just a bad experience in automation. And there's quite a few of those examples. Yeah. I don't like necessarily to throw predictions out, but I think there's a real risk that what's happened in some retail environments, that healthcare would be the next place for that to happen. Too much automation, sort of well designed, but not that great, and certainly not integrated on a particular user, overloads the cognitive ability of the single human that's actually in the physical world environment. And then I think we've got this new, in the last 15 years, new level of not trust, which is the role of the super platforms.
Yeah.
And we have this great slide. We need to update it because there's more. Like every time it's got all the big platform companies. You know, the whether there's 5 or 6 these days, I don't know. Yeah. But you look at what industries they have been able to get into because of data and their investment in AI. And those industries just continue to fall. And like it's this sort of slow conquest. And I think that people feel that that's the crux of the inequality in tech is like if you're not able to build a business in the ecosystem of big tech, when are you next? Yeah. How do you think about competition? There's no industry bounds anymore. It's a data algorithm AI topology, not one there's clear delineation between industries.
Let me get back to your question that you asked us before, because I don't want to miss that, is the question of like what do we tell companies in terms of how to build trust? There's sort of the first level of anything dealing with AI, and especially now with generative AI, is this sort of question of security, right? Sure. And so every company is going through this question of, do we allow people to use ChatGPT? Sure. Are we going to fine tune our own? Are we going to keep all of this within in-house or not? It's a really important question because there have been, issues with some of these external systems about data getting out and getting leaked. And so we start with that that's a premise that you actually have to deal with that. And it's an important one to deal with because depending on the study, 40-50% of people that are using these tools are lying to their bosses about it. Yeah. Right. So
or using unapproved tools.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Using unapproved tools. So if you think your people aren't using it, you're probably believing a fiction.
In denial.
Right? You're in denial. Yeah. So dealing with that and understanding it is really important. And so we'll start with here's the premise. You got to understand what the security is. We always work through it with everybody, which is don't put anything into these tools that you don't want to see on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, right? Like start with that as your mindset. Beyond that, though, what the key next step is actually helping people truly understand how this technology works. And I'm not talking about digging into the details of transformers and attention mechanisms and because that's too it's too technical. It's also not necessarily useful to people. What's useful is understanding how this intelligence works, when it's really good idea to use it, when it's not a good idea to use it, when is this tool going to be better at something than we humans will be, or when are we better than it, right? And how do you really start?
When is it just a good idea to do something without the use of technology?
Yeah.
And that matters a lot in education, is finding that.
You see that a lot.
Yeah.
Finding that one. Yeah. Like if language is a reflection of our thinking, and these models have back-engineered thinking as a result, when do we need to just do the language ourselves because it's the thinking that matters.
And as we're talking about all these examples, I'm realizing that we're literally talking about a divide. We haven't actually identified as a clear delineation. We talk about what we're doing with this, and we talk about terms like automation and prediction and all these different environments. But hey, write me an essay isn't I want to use AI to actually learn, make myself better, accomplish a task. It's literally, I don't want to do the thing. I'm going to tell the computer to do it. And am I better off? I don't know. Probably not really. Like, you didn't really do anything. You just said it for, you were given an assignment and you had to write it. Like, to me, that's, because you're not engaging with it. You're not actually iterating and you're not actually learning. You're not actually giving it anything versus the other side of it around kind of the creativity side. Like, you hit on something that was interesting because when we talk about creativity, we often think about diffusion models creating images of cats flying through space, right? Okay, that's creative, it's art. And it's like, well, no, creativity is problem solving, right? I need to see the problem in a new way. I need to reframe it in a new way. And I'm going to engage with this AI to help me solve my problem. Tying that into trust gets me to a question I have to y'all, because the trust and trust, you start with can I trust the system? Can I give it the data? Can I trust it to not leak that data? Can I trust the company that has it? But something that I love that you said, because I was thinking more my own sort of tunnel vision of like, I have a problem to solve. I roughly know how I want to do it. I'm going to engage this AI to solve it. But the value and the creativity of this system is you can ask it things. You can ask it zany combinations of things, and it's not going to judge you. And it's going to give you ways to start engaging parts of your brain you wouldn't otherwise do to help you solve your problem in a more, that's what, right? That's what we're trying to go towards, is better solutions, better problems. But like, once I start to lean into that I now have access to a series of experts, a panel of experts in specific things where I don't have to be afraid to ask it, well, what if I did this or that? I'm now out of my comfort zone because I don't know. I have to just blindly trust it because I am engaging in I've reached the limits of what I know. I'm now trusting you. And if you do give me some sort of weird answer off to the side, like, I'm just I don't know not to trust you at that point, right? Because I'm giving myself to you, right? Just like we do with humans, right? I'm trusting that the language and the words I'm going to say to you, that you're going to take them in good faith and then repeat them back to me, right? And so,
well, there's part of this is just the workflow of what do you go to these tools for, right? So, if I was thinking, I could go to the tool and say, gee, give me rank all of the cities in Texas by population and give me the actual population data and give it to me for the last 10 years. Yeah. Not a good use case for generative AI, right? Because generative AI, it might get it right, because it might be able to predict what the next word or token, which in this case would be numbers, would be, because it's seen population data well enough. But it's really not a very good thing. It's a much better thing to search, go to the US Census data and actually find the real data. It's actually not hard to find. But you could go to the tool and say, I want to create a prioritization list for my business based on population, right? How should I think about that? What else might I consider in terms of target cities for me in the state of Texas other than population? The answers to that are not something that you'd list as high on the factual accuracy. It's like, it's thinking about a problem in a different way. Right. And it's these tools throughout the data cosmos that it's created by reading an extraordinary amount of content, I put in quotes, but consuming this content, it's seen so many people talk about ways that you can prioritize your market entry strategy. Is any one of those the only right answer? No. Yeah. There's lots of really good answers. And you could ask that same question 10 times. You'll get 10 different answers. And then you could look at it and go, the important part now is my human judgment on this. I've now seen 10 different answers of how I might create a market entry strategy for whatever my new business is in the state of Texas. And I got lots of different options. That's great. That's a really good use case, because it doesn't matter. It's not whether I trust it to be correct or not. It's actually just useful. Right. So some of the times we're thinking about these tools, we're still thinking about them, and it's a natural way, because for decades, we've been trained into thinking that you put something into the computer and you get something out of it. Right? Whether that's because I was sitting there with my, computer and, in the old days when it wasn't even connected and I was just doing basic math and arithmetic and writing, it did exactly what I did. When I pressed the letter L, it was the letter L. Like, I got used to that machine being accurate, right? And then you get to the internet and you're actually like looking for a thing, and then it led you there. And that was good because you found the thing you were looking for. We now have to think about this in a totally different way. And it takes practice. I think this goes back to that sort of advice question for corporates, which is it takes practice for people to build a new intuition of what these tools are actually good for.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really changed just in the last year. I mean, predictive, what we would think of now as traditional AI, was all about getting an answer.
Mm-hmm.
What's the best prediction for sales for 3 quarters from now, right? That's what predictive analytics was about. Is it's trying to get as close to a bullseye as you can, right? That was the sort of aim of this. We're now in this world where AI has changed and it's this explosion, right? It's like fireworks going off.
Mm-hmm.
There's no one right answer to anything that comes out of these tools. And so you have to stop and go, so when am I going to use a tool where there is no one right answer? It's about exploring
Mm-hmm.
a data cosmos and being able to use that exploration to weave in these different ideas together into some sort of new novel creation, which could be an image, it could be a string of text, but it's a new novel thing that I've created through this interaction. And that's just a different kind of way of working with a machine. And so that's, I think, the biggest hurdle that I think we experience is people still looking at these tools from a traditional technology lens,
Mm-hmm.
which is normal. We've learned, like we're used to push the thing and it does the thing that we asked it to do. And now we have to rewire our brains to go, well, hold on a second. That's not the way these tools work at all. So how do we have this new experience with a new intelligence?
Yeah, it's fascinating. I was thinking about one of the things we were talking about last night. Do companies ever ask you how they can be the boulder in the stream? Like, are they fearful enough to ask you how to navigate AI as opposed to embrace it and run forward with it?
But how to avoid it?
Not so much avoid it, but maybe, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like I know avoiding is the right word. Like this goes back to what we were talking about fear. Like, and some of that's about privacy. How do you help me not have all my data on ChatGPT and things like that? But do people ask you how to navigate AI as opposed to embrace it? I guess is the.
Well, I think that it's an interesting point. Okay, so where would navigating AI sort of trying to I don't know. I get what you're asking. I don't know the word.
Yeah,
I agree with you on the
word.
word. But there's certainly in education, there's how do I, it's kind of like minimum viable AI.
There you go.
What's the minimum I can do?
Yeah.
Because I'm really scared of it, and
Yes,
I'm not sure if it's an existential risk to my career or my institution.
And
How can
so
I check the box?
Yeah, there's a little bit of lip service. There's a little bit of toe in the water. There's doing just enough. But really, what I'm talking about is actually putting a kind of a geofence around the human.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the human will still be the human, and I think that a year ago, before ChatGPT kind of changed the world, because it did, that strategy was really about slow peddling. That was just simply and we saw that a lot with marketing groups where they'd say, yeah, we like marketing technology, but not when it changes our jobs.
Right.
And now that's just flipped completely. The marketing groups are the ones who are adopting this as a storm.
Yeah.
There's no trustworthy data on just how much people are using these large language models to replace an enormous amount of what was probably copy paste and edited slightly. So it's rather than going to your previous marketing plan, copy pasting, editing slightly, you're now going to ChatGPT, copy paste, edit slightly. So it's a different source, but the sort of idea was the same.
Mm-hmm.
I think in the one where I think there's a more dangerous hedging, maybe it's hedging is the word.
Yeah,
I'm thinking
hedging.
about.
That's a great word.
I think that the more dangerous one is where people are trying to do something with AI that is actually fundamentally about surveilling workers and controlling workers.
Right.
Because that's actually one of the biggest capability increases that we've got with AI is the ability to manage work algorithmically.
Mm-hmm.
And there's good ways to adopt that and there's less good ways to adopt that. And it's not a bright line because you think about self-driving. We wrote a big report on self-driving back in 2016. And we haven't bothered to do it again because where we got to hasn't sort of really changed a lot. But if you think about what's really happened in self-driving is much more about automated driver assist and surveillance of the unsafe human practices. Yeah. And depending on what side of the fence you're on, you have a different perspective. As a road user sharing the road with big rigs, I'm pretty happy they're surveilled for safety. As a driver, I'd probably feel quite different about that. So I think that there's different lenses on this, what creates that sort of sense of how you might want to work around a machine. And this is where I think that thinking about the human and machine system as a complex system is the only way to go, because you actually have to recognize that what happens at the edges of the networks, at the lower levels of the system, the self-organizing capabilities of humans and their agents, that's actually going to drive so much more of the next phase of adoption of these tools than top-down policies that say, don't put things into ChatGPT. I mean, it's good. You got to say it, right? You got to say those things. The fact that half the people using it are completely ignoring that tells you something about the effectiveness of top-down control in a complex system.
Yeah. And so something that's coming up here when you talked about, using AI for productivity and efficiency, and then trying to make that gel when we think about AI, like on the generative side, you talked about creativity and all these things that it's not that those particular types of models aren't good at math. They were never designed to do that. However, someone still looks at it and goes, you're a computer, you're giving me false answers. Like there's an education thing there too. But what you guys, I'm really excited to dive into this because y'all talk about both sides of this. Like there's this exploratory creative side, problem solving, but on the other side of it, eventually you talked about, is it solving my problem? Is it useful? Right? That's always kind of this base level thing where we look at something and go, is this doing what I want it to do? Like, but ultimately you get to, how do we measure that? Like like at a personal level, you'd be like, I don't know, it's just useful. I keep using it. It keeps doing the thing for me. But as we look at society, is this actually a good for society? Is this increasing productivity? Is it saving lives? Is it increasing GDP? Whatever it may be, those have to convert to raw numbers and metrics. And CFOs can't look at AI and build trust in it. They're like, well, don't worry about it. It sometimes just does crazy things. And they're like, well, I'll go to jail, right? If my balance sheet doesn't look that way. And so as we build, trust in these different layers, at some point you have to be able to take a probabilistic system that's prone to errors, just like we are, just like your worker may accidentally transpose a number and cause an issue or whatever. You got to have these systems of controls in place. But like measurement and quantification is an incredibly important part of that.
It is, and it's elusive when you're dealing with these generative tools. So certain technologies, whether it's a database or like your system, where is there a good ROI when an alert is delivered because there's a safety issue where something got in the wrong place, or there's an efficiency gain because you're able to show how people moving around a facility can be more effective, right? All kinds. Those are things that you can sort of grab onto and say, yep, that there's a thing that I was able to measure, and that thing is worth more than the other thing, right? Like you can make that math. One of the parts that's, I think, still we don't really know yet, but I think it's going to be difficult to measure is these tools. In some ways, they're best used today as your digital partner. So it's like I got a coach in my pocket that can help me think through a problem. I've got something that can draft some email for me. I've got something that can review some of my writing and give me some tips and tricks on how I might want to rephrase that. I've used it when I'm sending off a message and it's I realize that I'm being a little too cranky, and I'd like to actually redraft that thing so that I'm a little bit less of a schmuck when I'm sending that message. That's a very difficult thing, if not impossible, to measure, right? The value of
you should just say what those two sentences were.
Which two sentences?
The angry sentence, and then what ChatGPT rewrote it as.
Oh, this is
I don't remember. Do you remember what
you
they
told
were?
the story the other day. He was cranky with someone, and he wrote something like, I fail to understand how blah, 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 blah. I don't know, something like that. And ChatGPT rewrote it as, I value our partnership.
Exactly. I value our partnership and continuing our working together. And at first where I was like, I can't believe how you could completely miss this thing. So there's clearly value there. It's hard to measure what that value is, and it's also very hard to even observe the interaction with the technology to know that there was value contributed.